Wild Tameless is about expanding our sphere of awareness into greater fields of consciousness. Our guests share their wisdom found from branching out into the unseen realms through alternative philosophy and mystical experiences. We focus on the soul component of the human experience and also touch on mind, body, and heart as we introduce pragmatic practices to create a meaningful and fulfilling life. We touch on modalities of health, ceremony, and ritual to help people harmonize their own energy and open up to the magic around them. The Wild Tameless is nature. It's the human spirit. It's music, art, and creation itself. This podcast is about helping people open to the great mystery so that we can collectively remember our place in the web of life and reorient our way forward for generations to come. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Kyle Dow. What's up, everyone? Welcome to this episode of the Wild Tameless. And I have a big treat for you guys, as it was such a pleasure for me to be hanging out with Chief Phillip Scott. I first met Chief at the Sundance last year in Lillooet, and he was there as a supporting chief. He came all the way from California for it, and he would sing songs at the beginning of each day leading up to the actual ceremony. And so in those preceding days, there were all sorts of other ceremonies in order to prepare the grounds and get the tree and make sure everything was in a good way for ceremony. And one of these mornings after our collective group briefing, he sang this song that just knocked me, almost knocked me over, almost dropped me to the ground. And it was so potent and powerful that I knew there was some type of connection there or some type of draw for me to this profound teacher and wisdom holder, and that there's a lot to learn. And so it's an absolute honor that he has joined me on this podcast. And to tell you a little bit about him, here is his bio. Chief Phillip Scott is of mixed ancestry and thrice struck by lightning. His spirit name is Black Horse, and he has faithfully walked the native path for over 40 years, learning from, adopted, and sanctioned by Indigenous medicine holy people, tribal spiritual leaders, wisdom keepers, and elders from several nations and cultures. Annually sundancing in the Lakota tradition for over 3 decades and a member of respected Native medicine families, he is a ceremonial leader and traditional healer entrusted to share Indigenous wisdom, knowledge, and medicine ways with the contemporary world. Serving as a bridge, he is a staunch defender of and advocate for Indigenous rights and environmental justice. He's an advisor and presenter on various sacred matters. He is a counselor, educator, and consultant for academic, spiritual, religious, medical, environmental, and penal institutions, as well as for corporations. Interviewed monthly for radio, his life story and writings have been featured in books and journals. He is a contributing author to Stanley Krippner's The Shamanic Powers of Rolling Thunder, and as well as Itzhak Berry's Shamanic Transformations. In addition to directing and teaching at Ancestral Voice, an institute for Indigenous Lifeways in Northern California, which he founded in 1994, he also maintains a healing practice, performs traditional ceremonies, conducts intensives, lectures, and leads pilgrimages worldwide. He is skilled in wilderness and urban survival and has received a master's degree from Naropa University and is also a licensed EMT. So that is a lot, and that would perhaps indicate why there's such richness that comes from this man, from this wisdom keeper. As he speaks, there is a depth to it that leaves me to know that meaningful things are being transmitted through him from elsewhere, perhaps, depending on what framework and lens you want to interpret it through. And so as you listen to this podcast, or as you're perhaps viewing it online, I invite you to set all other tasks aside. I know even myself, I like to multitask while listening to podcasts and things I'm interested in. But if we do take the time to invoke some stillness, I think you will gain a lot more from this interview. And it's going to be one of many as we continue to collaborate. And I serve to support Chief Phil in spreading his wisdom. So stay tuned for more episodes featuring Chief Phil. And if you feel drawn to him, I'm going to include all his contact information in the show notes. And he's really quite open and welcoming with his time and encourages anybody who feels called to reach out. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode of The Wild Tameless with Chief Phillip Scott. All right, Chief Phillip Scott, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Kyle.
Yeah, really grateful to have you here. It's been a little bit of time in the works and the first conversation of many. So definitely excited that this is all coming to fruition. And so something I like to ask my guests as we get going is to tell us a little bit about their current set and setting.
All right. Well, so firstly, I think it's important to acknowledge that today is a full moon.
Hmm.
So for me, that's the most important setting, if you will, that we gauge our awareness to the cycles of nature. As for where I reside, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is the home of the sovereign coastal Miwok, Ohlone, and Pomo nations, who have granted me permission to dwell in this beautiful watershed, as well as granting me permission to conduct traditional ceremonies from my families and my mentors and elders.
Hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for bringing all of that in, all that awareness of the natural cycles that we're a part of, and also the land that we dwell on. And often that's overlooked, I think, in our modern societies, both those things actually. And so for my set and setting, the term, as I'm familiar with it, set and setting comes from kind of the psychedelic landscape. So, and entering any particular ceremony, and I suppose it doesn't have to be specific to psychedelic, but it's important that we check in with our setting, our environment, and then also our mindset, because that determines or influences the experience that we're going to have. And so that's something that we could constantly be tracking, our set and setting. So I'm in Squamish, home of the Squamish Nation, and it's with great honor and gratitude that I dwell in this beautiful place. And my mindset is, yeah, definitely one of excitement. And it's a beautiful spring-like day as we're moving in that direction. And maybe I actually feel a little bit of the energy of the full moon as well, with this rising energy inside me.
Indeed, this is the final full moon before we enter in the northern hemisphere into the spring season, the time of emergence after the winter of dreaming. So it's a very auspicious time as the energies are beginning to amplify and build for us to walk the dreams that we've had in the winter and to manifest them. And frankly, I do believe that our Western colonized world is disconnected from the earth and from the natural cycles. And so it's important for us to cultivate that awareness, to be cognizant of the lunar and the solar cycles as well as the shift of seasons, because we are a part of the natural world, and the earth is not an adversary for us but is our mother, and will assist us in helping to heal ourselves and others when we align with the natural cycles. I'm often share a story. There was a woman who was part of my community many years ago. And at the age of 40, she was desiring to have a child, but she was amenarchic, meaning she did not have a moon time for nearly 17 years. And so her physician essentially informed her to adopt, that it would not be possible for her to have her own biological children. And she had profound lamentation about that. She was quite in despair over this news. Yet she faithfully attended all of the moon ceremonies that we conducted, the solar ceremonies as well. And within 1 year of participation in a very concerted and deliberate way, she began to cycle again. Her moon time returned. And soon afterward, she became pregnant and gave birth to a beautiful daughter. And so when we align with the natural cycles of which we are a part of, then we can achieve a sense of greater balance, harmony, and peace within ourselves and in relationship to one another and the earth herself.
That is such a profound and powerful example. And I can conceptually understand that. And having not really been living in close relation to the natural cycles of Earth, it's something that I haven't embodied. So it makes sense. And I imagine you have a deeper sense of the truth of that, having lived in right relation for all these years. And so, from your place of embodiment, perhaps in consideration of the more skeptical Western mind, how would you say more about it in a way that would allow the skeptic to make sense of it?
Well, it's unfortunate that one would be skeptical. I think that by keenly observing the world, one cannot deny the existence of the sun and the moon and the shift of seasons. Well, there may be areas of North America and the world where the shift is not so profound. For example, in the eastern coast, for example, of Turtle Island, there's a dramatic winter where the snow arrives. And it's very significant, even the shift in the seasons with the beautiful colors in the autumn as the deciduous trees' leaves turn color from green into crimson and vermilion and other, this colorful pyrotechnic display, so to speak. And then the leaves fall and the trees go into dormancy and they sleep and they dream. And then the snows arrive. So that's a very dramatic, if one can say, shift of seasons. Right? Whereas here on the West Coast, oftentimes the shift down in the San Francisco Bay Area is more subtle. Yet what we can say with these profound earth changes that are taking place now, that the shift of seasons have also become quite dramatic, far more so than in the past. And so for me, I would really encourage our listeners and our viewers to get out of their minds. And oftentimes we are thinking far too much. Right? There's a deification of our minds. There's a focus upon rationality and cognition. And oftentimes that's at the expense of our sense of feeling, our emotions, our spirit, even our somatic perception of the world. And so by keenly observing the world around us, then it becomes undeniable that there is the sun that rises and sets. There is the moon that waxes and wanes. And of course, the shift of seasons, all of which requires only us to pay attention, to be observant of our surroundings and our environment. And so that would be my encouragement,
Mm.
is to allow the mind to quiet, to not allow doubt to permeate one's thoughts. The original ecologists and ethologists, as animal behaviorists, were the indigenous peoples of the world because they were keenly paying attention to the natural cycles, to their environment. They were observing because they had an intimate relationship with the natural world. There was a sense of kinship, even in the language of indigenous peoples. Mother Earth, Father Sky, Grandfather Sun, Grandmother Moon. Even the kinship terms in terms of the animals and the plants, our elders, the bacteria and the viruses and the mycelium network, the and of course even the elementals, earth, air, fire, water, the primordial elders who are sentient and alive on this planet. Grandfather fire, grandmother water. These are the terms that we employ to understand and embody relationship. And so by opening ourselves up to experience interconnectivity of creation, of all of our relations, as we say in Lakota, Mita Kuye Oyasi, all my relations, then it becomes a lived experience. And therefore, we're not continuing to separate ourselves from the world around us through our rationality, through perhaps our human hubris, which separates us and creates that adversarial relationship that I spoke of earlier. So the dissolving of the thoughts of separation, so we can embrace the community of which we are embedded as a species.
I love all of that. Yeah, thank you. And hopefully that's helpful to those who are listening and have their doubts, and even myself, as I have a deep appreciation for the natural world and have been moving into um, deeper connection with that over time, and now putting concerted effort into getting there. I could see how the conditioning of modern society has kind of led to that separation, or has not given room for the possibility of truly experiencing that interconnectivity. In some of the language you use around the difference between the rational mind versus the kind of paying attention and the openness and the awareness and the feeling aspect of our experience, it sounds like you're speaking to the masculine and feminine qualities, and perhaps even the right and left hemisphere of the brain. And since our society these days is driven by patriarchy, I wonder if you could speak to that contrast between feminine and masculine qualities and even avenues of perception as we enter these natural spaces, or even a different way of being.
I think my preference, because it's important to ensure that we're not only speaking in terms of polarities,
Hmm.
masculine, feminine, right, wrong, good, bad. Again, this is more of a Western colonized way of thinking
Hmm.
based on of language. Whereas what I really encourage human beings to do, right? Because this is not just about gender or identity, it's about our humanity and the the breadth of what human experience can be. So my encouragement for all humans, because I think it's important to understand that we're not born human beings, we become human beings
Hmm.
through the way that we conduct ourselves. Right? So if we conduct ourselves in an honorable way, then my elders would say, he's becoming human, right? So it's basically our code that we live by, the ways that we behave, which will characterize our humanity. But the most important thing for us to focus upon is to get in touch with our instinct, to touch into our animal, because we are animals. Right? We are an organism, a being, a mammal that resides on this planet. And often I feel that our rationality interferes with our ability to connect in with our instinct, because that instinct connects us intimately to the earth, to the rhythms that I spoke about. There's a communication that takes place with the natural world when we are in our instinct. But that instinct also connects us to the ancestors, right? To the beings that have gone before, to the spirits that are entrusted to watch over us and guide us, whom we can communicate with in our dreams, as well as in the waking world by paying attention to the signs and the symbols and the omens that are around us. And so I think it's important, because also, according to my mentors and traditional teachers and medicine people with whom I've associated with and trained with, in the old days, prior to colonization, all identities were honored. And there was actually medicine that each gender and each identity carries, right? So there's the medicine of the masculine, the medicine of the feminine, the medicine of those who are non-binary and who identify in a different way, and that they have specific and special placements within ceremony. And they also have their own unique ceremonies as well. And so what that does is it creates a richness in the community that you have. So it's a multiplicity of perspectives. It's a diversity, if you will, which is also what the creation is, extraordinarily diverse. No two beings are the same. So it's about honoring the diversity of creation and the multiplicity of perspectives, which helps to allow a community of, say, two-leggeds, of humans, to function in a balanced kind of way. And so that's my encouragement, that we begin to move away from the perception of the binary world, again, which is also a way for us to begin to embrace the beauty of the world around us. Right? I call it the verbal curtain. Right? When we are incessantly in our heads with this conversation, it becomes very difficult to listen to the song of the ancestors who are singing all the time, the song of the natural world. So it's important for us to learn how to quiet our inner dialogue, to curtail that incessant conversation, so we can relish the silence and relish the songs from nature, from the unseen, from the ancestors, to be able to listen to the spirits who are attempting to guide us so that we can walk that good road of a human being.
Yeah, very beautiful. It sounds like it's the segmentation of our experience that creates or perpetuates the separation. And if we could find that place of openness, then we can be more inclusive with our experience and also our kin, whether that's fellow humans, the two-legged, or all other aspects of the natural world. And to foster that sense of openness, I definitely hear you that we have to let go of our stories, the stories that we're constantly telling ourselves in our mind. And in a recent ceremony, that was my mantra: stop the story, pay attention. Stop the story, pay attention, over and over again, because things were just being shown to me. But as soon as I started telling myself what was being shown to me, it was removing myself from the truth of the information or the experience itself.
Mhm.
So, as we encourage people to get into that space of openness and connection, do you have any practices that you like to suggest?
Well, before I give a practice, I just want to echo back what you share, which is, human beings are storytellers.
Hmm.
It's a part of our legacy. It's part of our journey. Well before there was television and media and cell phones, we would gather around the fire and we would tell stories to one another. And these stories also had to do with the fortification and um, the cementing or planting of the seeds of the origins of our people. And so the the gift, if you will, is learning how to not create false narratives. So we ask ourselves, what are the stories we are telling ourselves? And one of the prevailing stories and fictions, as far as I'm concerned, is the perception that we human beings have dominion over all of creation. And I think that's the reason why there's this fostering of separation, that we have divorced ourselves from the natural world because we perceive ourselves as superior and with dominion and control over the earth herself and all beings upon her. Whereas the indigenous understandings, and this is essentially universal, and even within the origin stories in the Christian theology as well, human beings are the last to be created, not the first. Therefore, we are the grandchildren. We have the most to learn because we're the youngest beings on the planet. And within indigenous cultures, there is a reverence and a respect for one's elders. And so before us, therefore, is the sentient beings of earth, air, fire, water, the elementals. Right? Then the next iteration of evolution is the bacteria and the viruses and the mycelium network. Then come the plant nations and then our animal relations, all before us. And that's why indigenous peoples have reverence and respect for these beings and look to them for counsel and guidance on how to live in balance and harmony upon the earth. So if we can begin to shape shift that narrative to become more humble, to look to our elders for guidance, rather than thinking that we are the most supreme being on this planet, it will help us to ensure that this earth can survive for 7 generations and beyond. Because our current trajectory is unsustainable. So, therefore, how can we begin this process of humility and the process of curtailing the inner dialogue? Well, we have meditation, we have prayer, we have ceremony and ritual. All of these are means by which we can begin to erode the attachment to the self, to the ego, and I preface that by stating it's not about eliminating our ego or our perception of self, but ensuring that it's in proper relationship. So we're not aggrandizing ourselves or with excessive self-reflection or self-importance, but rather from a place of humble pride, if you will. Right? That we honor ourselves, we honor our gifts, we honor the medicine that we carry. And yet also ensuring that we are able to listen to the song of the earth, to the song of our relations, to the spirits who guide us, both in the waking world and the dream time. That for me is what is essential. And so to have a practice, and I really love the word practice for that reason, because practice makes impeccable, not perfect. Nothing and no being on this planet is perfect. However, we can strive for excellence. We can do our best, and that's what impeccability means to myself. And so we have a rhythm, not a routine. For me, routines can often become mindless. And we want to bring awareness to our actions and our conduct. Therefore, we engage with rhythmicity. We find a discipline in order to ensure that we are nourished by our sacred practice, which means daily prayer, daily meditation, rituals, both for oneself in the presence of others, and of course, ceremony, which allows our spirit to be exercised as well. Right? We know that if we go to the gym, we do cardio and lift weights, that our physical body will become strong and vital. Well, that strength and that vitality is what is achieved through the spirit with the assistance of ritual and ceremony. And so, again, the encouragement is always for us to have a sacred practice that becomes a part of our discipline. And of course, the word discipline for me comes from the word discipleship, right? Disciple. To be a disciple is to be a student, to be passionate, to be a lover of learning, incessantly desiring to learn more. And so for the awakened warrior, discipline is an intrinsic drive, not an externalized force. But it's not possible to imagine that we're unable to do it, because it nourishes us and we derive tremendous value and benefit in terms of our health, in terms of our sobriety, our balance. So we can't imagine not engaging in the practice. So myself, my mentors, now all of whom, with the exception of one, are in the spirit world, would rise at 4 o'clock in the morning to pray, with that window of time being when the veil between the worlds is the thinnest, when the atmosphere is palpable with the presence of the holy ones. We would pray for others, pray for this world, for peace, for the protection and the preservation of our earth and all relations upon her. And no alarm clocks required. I just naturally rise circa 4 a.m. every morning. And I will pray. I will cleanse myself off. I will sing and pray, just as we did. I think it's important for your listeners, our listeners, to know that prior to our conversation today, on this auspicious day, the initiation of our conversations on this full moon, right before the spring equinox, that we cleansed ourselves off with sage, knowing that I do not prefer the term smudging, because smudging is to smear and to make unclear. So I prefer the phrase cleansing or purifying with smoke, in this case with sage smoke. And then we sang a song, traditional song, to invoke the ancestors. And then we prayed to ensure that there was proper guidance as we begin to share regarding sacred matters. And it's second nature for myself and others who walk the native path to do so. Not long ago, a friend asked me to assist her with moving out of her space. And once all of the items had been cleared, and I cleansed herself off with sage and sang songs of sanctification of the space and the home, and prayed with holy tobacco, sending smoke on her behalf, and gratitude for the learnings that she received while residing in that home, and that fortune would favor her in the future, that she can travel safely to her next destination, and that she takes her spirit with her, that there's no residue energetically that remains in the space. And this is second nature to how I live in the world, how Indigenous peoples would bless and cleanse spaces, both whether entering into them or departing them. And that's, again, how we live, with this awareness of the energetics of existence, because everything is energy.
Yeah, I really appreciate that there is not only the natural rhythms of nature that you're speaking to, but also the rhythms of life, as we do have these human experiences in chapters. And with that, there are transitions as we leave places that perhaps were longer term dwellings, or maybe we're departing from a relationship, or we lose somebody as life goes, or we transition from a job. And I find that we often get hung up on things that were, not finding acceptance with things as they are. So the process of appreciation for what we have currently, and maybe even appreciation for what we had, but no longer clinging to them. So that kind of brings in this concept of grief. And so I wonder if you could say a little bit about that in good practices to have healthy transitions.
Oh, I can certainly speak to grief as a widower. I think it's important to understand, to kind of segue from what you just shared. We have a predilection for control as human beings. We often try to control people or circumstances when it doesn't go our way or is not suiting us. So part of the teaching is about surrender. And grief is a medicine of surrender, because the truth of existence is impermanence in this plane of awareness, right? Within this time and spatial reality on the earth, that life and death are in an intimate dance. And a time will come when we will take our last breath, that, as our Chief Our Lame Deer, the Lakota Nation would say, we make the earth our final pillow. Of course, it's not just people who may pass from our life and go home, as it's called, but there may be circumstances, loss that we experience in other ways. All of these experiences of loss engender varying degrees of grief. In the case of a loved one, it has to do with a profound experience of love and attachment. And it's natural when those whom we love take their final breath and go home, that we experience profound anguish, despair, and grief over their passing. And grief is our greatest teacher. Grief will hold us as long as necessary for us to glean the lessons, the learnings, and the medicine, which obviously involves a deeper layer of surrender and acceptance of the truth of reality to help us prepare for that for ourselves. And as a consequence of that acceptance comes a deeper layer of compassion, where we can all be touched by suffering. And so, in truth, I didn't know what suffering was until my wife passed away unexpectedly, visiting our Lakota mother on the reservation. And my heart was absolutely shattered. And I'm grateful for this way of life, the Indigenous path, because it was essential for my healing. All of the ceremonies. It's an Indigenous science. Indigenous peoples have existed on this planet for millennia. They, more than any other people, understand experience of loss and grief. And so there are specific ceremonies, not only to assist that soul on their journey home, but ceremonies to assist with the bereaved, with those that are still remembering their loved ones as they continue to walk to the earth the best of their ability. In the Lakota, there's what's known as the wiping of the tears ceremony, which I had the privilege of being able to experience, which assisted me in grieving the passing of my beloved wife. And so grief tenderizes us, tenderizes our heart. As our heart is shattered, it allows the source, allows the divine to enter in even more profoundly and strongly. Allows us greater compassion and greater love, touching into the commonality of our humanity. There are three things as human beings that we have in common, possibly four. So the first is that we are born. We can all look and see that we have an umbilicus, belly button. And so we have been birthed into the world through the gift of our biological mothers, through the gateway of their womb through the sacrifice that they made to carry us for 9 moons, and then to allow the waters of life to break, allow the sacrifice of their blood and their tissue so that we can arrive here. And a time will come after walking this earth, and the duration of time we do not know. It's time for us to take our final breath, to take our last step upon the earth, knowing that each step we take, Mother Earth kisses our feet, and that each breath is an inspiration from Source. A time will arrive when we're called home from classroom planet Earth, as I call it, and call her. And our spirit will return home beyond the stars, where we all have come from. That we all share in common as well. The third is that as we live this life and experience impermanence, then we'll be touched by grief. And grief will transform us and will guide and teach us. The other fourth possible commonality of our humanity is that we can experience joy. That's no guarantee. However, I do believe firmly that when we cultivate a sacred practice through discipline and devotion, that we cultivate that intimate relationship with the natural world and the unseen, that we forge alliances and friendships and meaningful relationships, that there is a great possibility for us to have joy. And so for me, those are the 4 aspects that are part of our common humanity.
The other one you lumped in there the other day when I first hear you speak about this was love, and you paired that with joy. And I think both love and joy are, as is grief, are on a spectrum. So there's different degrees and intensities of all those things. And I think true joy is something to aspire to and to be in that childlike state of wonder. And I like the definition that true joy is embodying an energy that makes those around you happier.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can all try to get there and track our levels of joy and what brings us joy. And for me, being out in nature brings me joy. Playing music brings me joy. And these are things I don't think joy is like a default state for me. So it's something that I'm working on and something we could all work on to not take everything so seriously. And then similarly with love, I think a lot of us hide ourselves from love because of the fear of the grief that comes with it, that complementary polarity that is hard and terrifying. And you went there, like all the way there, having lost your true love. And I could tell that there are still parts of me that are closed off from the full expanse of love due to fear and my own conditioning and trauma. And I wonder if you want to reflect anything on those notions.
Well, for me, love is the binding force of this universe. That's the glue, that's the adhesive. And in terms of human relationships, if you're going to love, then you must be prepared to bleed. You will inevitably weep. It's part of the journey. And rightly so, as you had honestly disclosed, because people fear pain and suffering, they often close themselves off to love. And so, my encouragement to you and everyone who's listening or viewing this, that you cultivate courage. Courage meaning from the French for cœur, for heart. The warrior lives in the heart, not the mind. And so you fall into your heart and you allow your heart to expand so you can touch into the palpable love of the universe. That's that binding force I spoke of. To see yourself and experience yourself as a beloved being, so that when you truly embrace your own intrinsic belovedness, then the universe can allow a mirror of reflection to emerge in the world around you, that you can see the beloved in the reflection, your own belovedness in another beloved, and vice versa. But that can only happen when you're willing to bleed, when you're willing to weep, and when you're willing to make sacrifices. Without that, you place conditions and restrictions on what's possible and what becomes available in the arena of love.
I like that you're speaking about openness and acceptance and the willingness to enter into a experience of suffering and pain, that we must be open to the full spectrum in order to get the full experience, I suppose, of being human. So if we want that deep capacity to love, then we have to accept the pain that comes with it. And I wonder if in your um, ontology, I suppose, your philosophy of the nature of being, if that concept kind of ties into being able to make sense of the hardships of humanity, the real atrocities that do take place on this earth. Is there a way that you make sense of that and can kind of manage to maintain faith or optimism through the process?
I'm reminded of a story that I heard credited to the Tsalagi, Cherokee Nation. And a young boy was in the presence of his grandfather. And he approached his elder and addressed him and said, Grandfather, I feel that I'm at war with myself internally. And there are two wolves that are fighting. And one wolf is a dark wolf. And that represents all of that which is uncomfortable for me to see about myself. And then there's a white wolf. And the white wolf are all the favorable aspects of myself. And they're warring with each other. Who will win, grandfather? And his grandfather took a moment of reflection and silence and said, "The one you feed, grandson." Inside every human being are these two wolves. And so, personally, I believe in intrinsic goodness. I certainly see the darker aspects of our humanity. But I have conviction that the favorable aspects of ourselves will prevail. We are certainly in a profound crisis as a species. And I do believe that we'll be able to use our human instinct, our ingenuity, our intellect, our creativity to come together in solidarity for us to dream a better world, or shall we say, a sustainable world, because the world is already beautiful. So we don't have to improve upon it. In fact, it often has become part of the problem that we think that we can improve upon things, whereas all we really need to do is to honor and respect and adore and cherish this earth and all beings upon her, including ourselves, so that we'll remember our collective original instructions as a species, which is namely to be responsible stewards and protectors of the earth and all life upon her, to ensure that there will be an earth that is inhabitable for 7 generations of all of our relations and beyond. So there is certainly darker aspects of our humanity that require our attention and our refinement and our healing. And it's really incumbent upon each and every human being, every individual, to do their inner work so they can heal. And in so doing, then we begin to honor that which is potentially good within us. And again, I don't want to get caught in this polarity of good and bad. Whereas we need to embrace the parts of ourselves that require refinement, healing, and attention, and to bring compassion and kindness and tenderness to those parts of ourselves, rather than to decry them, to denigrate them, criticize them, which only continues to perpetuate a cycle of more self-suffering, self-sabotage, self-recrimination with all of our relations. Oh, we talk, we else.
Oh, thank you, Chief. So much richness in there, and lots of threads to follow up upon in our next conversation. And I wonder if there's anything you want to leave the listener with in terms of where they could find you, or any offerings you have that they could follow up on.
Certainly. So the best way to reach me currently is by phone at 415-310-0981. They can also email me, which is Phillip, Phillip, at ancestralvoice.org. And Ancestral Voice has a Facebook page. We have Instagram now. And I am currently near the tail end of reconstructing my website. And that's www.ancestralvoice.org. So definitely expanding social media platforms to get the word out there even more in our world today.
Excellent. Well, anybody who feels called can reach out to Chief Philip, and you could also reach out to me if you have any questions pertaining to any of this. And I'll probably defer to Chief Philip, but maybe I could point you in the right direction for local opportunities here in Squamish and the surrounding area. And I appreciate everybody tuning in and coming to the conversation with openness and perhaps carrying some of that openness, optimism, and courage forward into their daily life. All my relations.
Aho, mitakuayasi.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment and perhaps sharing with others. And if you are curious about some of the services I offer, you can check out my website, connectionintegration.com. You'll see on there that I offer one-on-one support and guidance based around spiritual and mental wellness. I also offer nature connection experiences and plant medicine retreats throughout the year. Until next time, wishing you much curiosity, wonder, and peace as you open yourself up to the wild tameless. Be well.